In ancient Persia, during the reign of King Xerxes, the Jewish people lived as exiles. Among them was a young woman named Esther, whose beauty and courage would lead her to save her people from destruction. At the royal palace in Susa, King Xerxes hosted a grand banquet that lasted 180 days, followed by a 7-day feast for all his subjects. On the final day, after drinking heavily, the king commanded his queen, Vashti, to appear before him to display her beauty. However, Vashti refused, angering Xerxes. On the advice of his counselors, he removed her from her position as queen. To find a new queen, a search was conducted across the empire for the most beautiful young women who were brought to the royal harem under the care of Haggai, the eunuch in charge. Among them was Esther, also known as Hadassah, an orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai. Mordecai instructed her to keep her Jewish identity a secret. After a year of beauty treatments, each woman was presented to the king. When Esther's turn came, she captivated everyone who saw her, including the king himself. Xerxes was so pleased with her that he placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen. Meanwhile, Mordecai uncovered a plot by two palace guards, Bigthana and Teresh, to assassinate King Xerxes. He informed Esther, who reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The plot was investigated, found to be true, and the conspirators were executed. The event was recorded in the royal chronicles. Not long after, King Xerxes promoted a man named Haman, an Agagite, to the highest position in the kingdom, second only to the king. All the royal officials bowed before him, as commanded by Xerxes, but Mordecai refused. Enraged, Haman sought to not only punish Mordecai, but to destroy all the Jews in the empire. To determine the best day for his plan, Haman cast lots, known as Pur, which landed on the 13th day of the 12th month, Adar. He convinced Xerxes that a certain group of people in the kingdom followed their own laws and should be eliminated. In exchange for permission to carry out the genocide, he offered a massive sum of silver to the royal treasury. The king agreed, giving Haman his signet ring to seal the decree. Messages were sent across the empire ordering the extermination of the Jewish people on a single day and their possessions to be plundered. While the city of Susa was thrown into confusion, the king and Haman sat down to drink. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and mourned loudly in the streets. Throughout the empire, Jews fasted, wept, and mourned. Esther's attendants informed her of Mordecai's distress, and she sent clothes for him, but he refused them. Instead, through a messenger named Hathach, he told Esther of Haman's plot and urged her to go before the king and plead for her people. Esther hesitated, reminding Mordecai that approaching the king uninvited could mean death unless the king extended his golden scepter. Mordecai responded, urging her to act, warning that if she remained silent, deliverance would come from another source, but she and her family would perish. He added, "Who knows? Perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Moved by his words, Esther asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Susa to fast for 3 days, and she and her attendants would do the same. After that, she declared, "I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood before the inner court. When King Xerxes saw her, he was pleased and extended his golden scepter, sparing her life. He asked what she desired, offering even up to half his kingdom. Instead of making her request immediately, Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet. At the banquet, the king again asked her what she desired, but Esther invited him and Haman to another feast the next day, where she would make her petition. Haman left the gathering in high spirits, but was enraged when he saw Mordecai still refusing to bow. At home, he boasted to his wife, Zeresh, and friends about his wealth, power, and special invitation to the queen's banquet. However, he admitted that none of it satisfied him while Mordecai still lived. His wife and friends advised him to set up a 50-cubit pole and ask the king to have Mordecai executed on it. Pleased with the idea, Haman had the pole built. That night, Xerxes could not sleep, so he ordered the royal chronicles to be read to him. He discovered that Mordecai had once saved his life, yet had never been rewarded. The next morning, as Haman entered the court to request Mordecai's execution, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king wishes to honor?" Believing the king meant him, Haman suggested dressing the man in the king's robes, placing him on the king's horse, and parading him through the city. To his horror, the king commanded him to do this for Mordecai. Haman had to personally lead the procession, humiliated. Afterward, he returned home in despair, only to be summoned to Esther's second banquet. During the feast, Xerxes once more asked Esther what she desired. She finally revealed her request. "Grant me my life and the lives of my people, for we have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king demanded to know who was responsible. Esther pointed to Haman, this vile enemy. Terrified, Haman begged for his life, but the king, in a fit of rage, left the room. When he returned, he saw Haman falling onto Esther's couch, and, believing he was attacking the queen, he ordered his execution. One of the eunuchs pointed out the pole Haman had built for Mordecai, and the king ordered that Haman be impaled on it. That same day, Xerxes granted Esther Haman's estate and gave Mordecai his signet ring, making him second in command. However, the previous decree could not be revoked, so Esther pleaded with the king to issue a new one, allowing the Jews to defend themselves. The king agreed, and a new edict was sent out, granting the Jews the right to assemble and fight back against any attackers. On the appointed day, the Jews defeated their enemies. In Susa alone, 500 men and Haman's 10 sons were killed. In the rest of the provinces, 75,000 enemies were slain. However, the Jews did not take any plunder. The following day, they celebrated their victory with feasting and joy. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews, instructing them to observe an annual festival on the 14th and 15th of Adar, commemorating their deliverance. This celebration became known as Purim, named after the lots Haman had cast. The Jews vowed to keep the festival forever, passing it down to future generations. King Xerxes continued to rule, and Mordecai, now his highest official, was honored among his people for working for their welfare. The story of Esther remains a powerful example of bravery, faith, and the impact one person can have in the face of adversity.